The biggest misnomers about the history of the Bucks and just how relevant is this franchise on the NBA level. We get the inside scoop from Jordan Treske coming up next on today's Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. My name is Justin Garcia. You can hear me on the Bucks Radio Network. We thank you for making this your first listen of the day each and every day. Be sure to like and subscribe. It helps us out immensely. Joining us on the show today, we're going to take a look at the history of this Milwaukee Bucks franchise. And I know we mentioned it previously, but we have Jordan Treske on with us to talk about the history of this franchise. Is your book just came out already now 2 months ago, over 2 months ago, that this was released, called Building the Bucks. You can find it where you get your books and Amazon as well. Jordan has a link to it on his Twitter page if you want to get directly to it from there. But let's just dig right into this, Jordan. So what prompted you to write this book?
I was definitely, it's been stuff rattling in my brain and always kind of was with me for a very long time. The impetus truly was winning the title, round numbers, 50 years, kind of symmetry and all that stuff always takes over. But in reality, writing for Behind the Buck Pass for 6.5, almost 7 years leading up to the title. And it was really when the NBA world paused during COVID, it's okay, what do we do for it? At the time it felt like years, but it was a few months. Certainly felt like a few years too. But it was just this excuse to kind of go back and really go through Bucks history, which is already something that my Win and Six co-host Adam McGee and I really enjoyed going through the last few years prior or leading up to that. So I think it was just kind of these stories and this history just always in the back of my mind. And of course, when it's not that far removed from, or, whatever it was, 12, 15 months later, Bucks win the title. It's I'm seeing how things are, the symmetry or a lot of things that differ from how the Bucks won the title in 1971 versus how the Bucks won the title in 2021.
I mean, that itself, the fact that this is the 5-year anniversary season of that happening already feels like a lifetime ago. And just, I've talked about it with others, and even seeing memories pop up on your phone too, that takes you back to that, holy cow, I forgot that's what this was like, or that's what we were doing. And, it's not like it was any different or special for the Bucks than it was any other team that was in the playoffs and participating in the bubble, but it did make it, I think, even more rewarding to go through the bubble experience, which was not ideal for anyone with that group. But just the lead up to it too, where the Bucks were like this rolling death machine that was blowing everyone out, and they were 40-6, I think, when they beat the Hornets in Paris, and they were trending towards a 70-win team. It wasn't until the final actual games in the regular season where they finally suffered consecutive losses, and then everything paused, and you get to the bubble, and just from the onset, it just felt like something doesn't feel right here. And you go out like you do to the Miami Heat, that it just was like, wow, where do we go from here? And a massive bummer. So it just made the buildup, which was rocky in 2021 to that title, all the more sweet when it culminated with that win against the Suns in Game 6.
And part within that huge time frame of it just felt like we're talking about sports, but we're also not talking about sports. Is everything just felt so real for
Uncertain and
yeah, and it's there's you couldn't, everything was just creepy in or flattening into each other. So that was part of it too, I think.
we had, like, I think back to the bubble, and just it still feels like, was this real? Where we were only ESPN and TNT were actually in the bubble.
Yeah.
So everyone was doing things from their own arena, and like walking into the arena in the middle of summer, and there's no one else in that building except for, me and Ted Davis, our engineer, Jim Paschke, Zora was there, and a couple of like, TV engineers and producers. And we're doing this from a room just off of where Doc Rivers now addresses the media, that you're walking in here and you're like, this is so weird. Like, we were in a coach's office. We had to wear masks on the air. We had to get screened to walk into the building every single day and pass protocols. That um it just felt very dystopian to think like, I guess
Oh
this
yeah.
is what it's like. How long is it going to be like this? And to think about that, and like, okay, now we're back to somewhat normal the next year. Although even that had an asterisk applied to it and a caveat, but it was just such a surreal and weird experience that, like, I don't think Bucks fans needed any additional reason to savor the championship more, but it added to it.
Certainly. I mean, even the playoff run, I know we're kind of jumping around, but like I remember going to the playoff run during the title year, game 2 against the Heat. I was in the Deer District, and everybody, when you'd say that, it's like, oh, we think of what it was, the game 6. It was like, no, they had like
No.
patio tables and chairs out, and like
Yep.
kind of like the, not house party, but like music. I think
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
you might have been out there too, like kind of like,
We did. It was like me and Mel and Joe too, Zora occasionally, but we would
yeah.
do like basically a pep rally before every game. And it's funny you bring, because I was just talking about that with someone else. Um, that whole setup for the Heat series, there, like, it wasn't game 6.
No.
It was, you had people there, and then you win game 1 and like, okay, we get a little more people. It started to build, but then you get to the Nets series, and for game 3, it was dead. They're down 0-2. You lost
Oh
game
yeah,
2
duh.
by
Yeah.
49 points. That there was people, but there was like this nervous energy of like, well, this is it, huh? And then
Yep.
from that game on is when it really started to build. Like, it was after game 4, because that was when they started doing it for every single game. So
Yeah.
it was after game 4 when they tied the series, that from that point forward, then you could see people were like, all right, I think we got a chance. And it just kept building to culminate in the, I don't, the number I've been told, I refuse to believe is real. It's more than that we're out there
Yeah.
for game 6, but it was just, that was a process to build up to.
Oh yeah. I mean, even I probably the radio call from the Sun series I think of, or I shouldn't say just radio call. The call that I think of most is Ted Davis's
Yeah.
call of the valley oop.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm like, I remember hearing at the time, I was like, why are people cheering? And then you make the, oh yeah, he is doing it in Pfizer.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
couldn't go. It's just like, it will take years to really comprehend just how like it's so thrilling to think about, but like, the fact that Thanasis was even on the in game 6 because he had a COVID or positive COVID test. Like, there's so many things that we just have lost to time from that time frame that just like is insane.
There, we will get to the book and the rest of the history of the Bucks, but we just started going down memory lane here. Yeah, I mean, it was, and I've talked about this before. I think we talked about it on the episode Mel did with us last summer. That Sun series too, without getting myself in trouble here, you started to see a lot of people that were just gone. And then, as we learned, Thanasis's positive tests and other things, like there were people that Mel and I worked with on a daily basis that you would just show up and like, where's so-and-so? Like, oh, they're working from home today. And then you're like, oh, that's weird. And then it takes a couple of seconds of like, oh, so that was starting to come for the Bucks, that the series ended at the best possible time. But yeah, like when you mentioned Ted's call, I mean, that the game 6 and game 5, his calls to close those two
Just
games will live in infamy, and that's the best work he's ever done, with a long record of very good work in doing that. And the game 7 call against the Brooklyn Nets, or just game 7 in general, since you mentioned doing the games from in the arena, so we did it from our usual spot in the
yeah.
broadcast booth. And that's when it was starting to grow, with more and more people outside the arena, and they were playing the game out there. We had a feed that was piped into us from the league that we were watching on our computer monitors, and it was delayed.
Of course.
So it was one of those things where it's spoiled, but in a good way, where it was Kevin Durant's final shot, and we were delayed by
Oh,
maybe a half a second by what the crowd outside the arena is hearing. And we could hear an eruption from outside the building, because the arena is empty. It's just the two of
yeah.
us, our engineer, and like custodians in there. And
That's
so
crazy.
we could just hear this eruption outside, and you're like, what just happened? And then like a second later, you see Kevin Durant airballs the three.
That is just nuts. Again, it's just like, I mean, even the following year, like the kind of the title defense, like they're just like, oh yeah, DeMarcus Cousins was a Buck. Like, it's just like, it's stuff like that. I'm like, I will like, we're thankfully removed from that era or that time frame, but there's just like the tentacles of it still like pop in your mind of just like, huh, that happened, huh? Like it's like, constantly like bewildered by life events, I guess.
The DeMarcus Cousins debate. Yeah, that is one that will live on for quite some time. But let's shift back further and further to the origins of this franchise, and some interesting things that have come. Well, I wouldn't say come out, but I just think don't get as much attention in the overall history of this franchise. So we'll start to sift through that coming up after this. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there's Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one financial finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. Monarch is built for people with busy lives. If you've put off organizing your finances, Monarch is here for you. Does the heavy lifting for you, where you can link all of your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, and get smart categorization of your spending to finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. They can help you identify whether or not you're saving as much as you should or you thought you were. Monarch helps you notice inefficient investment allocation and discover forgotten 401ks from past jobs. It can also help you maximize those investments, increasing your savings rates, easily reviewing finances with your partner or even a financial advisor to keep a clear view of your financial health. Don't let financial opportunity slip through the cracks. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with the code LOCKEDONNBA. So the history of this team, and I think we were talking about it a little before we started recording, but it's, I don't know if I'd say tough. It's gotten better, but there are much clearer archives and understandings and publications of the history of teams like the Packers and the Bucks than I think, or excuse me, the Brewers, and I think there are the Bucks. And a lot of that, I think it's a number of things. It has to do with the Bucks. The 2021 title was one thing, but the Packers are always going to be king in this state. The Brewers have the luxury of selling the weather too, and they've been in their best era throughout the course of their franchise, while the Bucks have been on this ascent as well. So you're already up against it there. And I think, frankly, a lot of people around a certain age, the experiences they had in the Bucks they knew were not good. So you just kind of associate that with the Bucks. So what was it that navigated you to saying like, hey, we need to put what the history is of this franchise out there more?
Obviously, I think it's just because of the story itself that they are that they were an expansion team going to 1968 and they win the title 3 years later. Like, I know that's kind of like, I feel like the second sentence and everything of like, oh, they're like, what, like I think other teams have surpassed this since, but like of the big North American sports, the Bucks are always mentioned as like, this is one of the few teams that have won a world, or not World Series, but a world championship in this amount of time. Like the Arizona Diamondbacks in the MLB, or like Atlanta United in the MLS, but it's a very rare few. And then there's that. There's obviously the Kareem angle. There's the Oscar Robertson angle. There is kind of like these guys that are legends of the game that like a Larry Costello, a Wayne Embry, Johnny. It just like go on down the line of like we know of that team of like they're kind of this mythic team at this point. But part of what compelled me to just go further and further with it is that it was almost kind of a luxury that there wasn't like a lot out there from that time. Like anything that I would try to find was always out of print. I would get from the library, whether it was like massive amount of newspaper articles, or like out of print books. And it was a luxury that this wasn't on like TV or like saved to YouTube, because like even the title clinching game in Game 4 against the Baltimore Bullets, it's like I think it's only the second half is on YouTube.
I was going to say the only thing I ever remember seeing from that is just the celebration in the locker room.
Yeah, so it's like obviously I'm a 33-year-old man. I did not watch this team play. I understand if people would probably find that to be like, why are you writing about a team that you didn't even watch play? But I think that was having that kind of restraint forced me to go into things a lot deeper than I even anticipated going into to begin with, honestly.
Well, I think, one of the other interesting things that I've seen you talk about this elsewhere too, is that I don't think, I mean, I'll be clear. There are certainly some diehard Bucks fans. There's a lot of them that understand the history of this team and that suffered through the lean years after that run from 79 through the 80s. But especially, and I don't mean this in a bad way, if you're a newer fan that came along for the Giannis era, I don't think a lot of fans realize like the Bucks aren't really a Johnny come lately in the league. Like they were one of the first, like 14 teams, 15 teams in the league.
By the time that by their first season, them and the Suns made it to 14 in 1968, 69. And then that's the other thing. So like if you think of that expansion era from like 1966 to 80, the NBA goes from 9 teams, which is like crazy that they would have odd number
20,
teams. 23.
25, yeah.
So, and then some of those get relocated, like Buffalo goes to San Diego, then San Diego to LA. But it's just like they just swell up to this massive number, and obviously the merger, as they say, helps that number. But like you think of it as like, oh, they're finding themselves, they're establishing the league, and you read stuff from that time. It's like, what are they doing? Like they're just like the business is growing and growing, and the kind of the money's going into basketball at that time that like no one really saw coming at the rate that it did.
Well, and even if you take the merger out of it, they doubled the size of the league in like 10 years?
If less than, because I think by the time Kareem left, they went to like either 17 or 18 teams. So yeah, like they doubled their size in 7 to 8 years, which is that's crazy.
Yeah, and like the point is there is a rich history with this group, and you're mentioned too of like, oh wow, it was the third year that they won the championship, that they're this new expansion franchise that finds success early. It was year 2 where you started to see the makings of it, and obviously Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was the biggest part of that, and the fortuitous flip of a coin too that meant Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is coming to Milwaukee instead of Phoenix.
Yes. I will be very honest, Kareem is always just like a fascinating figure. It's probably like if 1A was like, let's go back in time and like how are the Bucks viewed in kind of the local sense, but also like the national sense. It was also like I just wanted to see like what people thought of Kareem because
Yes.
we don't. When you think of Kareem, it's always Lakers now. I mean,
Yeah.
even I think the HBO documentary that he did, I think 10 minutes of it is on his
Yeah.
time in Milwaukee.
It was him as a high school player and how he was this unheard of phenom, the dominance at UCLA and the championships with the Lakers.
Yeah, and it's so from that perspective, I was like, a lot of things probably I was just kind of it didn't hit me, but doing the book of like, oh yeah, like there was no early entry. So when Kareem was going out, it was it was not a coincidence that the Bucks wanted to get into the NBA. I
Yeah.
should say the ownership group,
Right.
Marvin Fishman and Wes Pavlon, they wanted to get in the NBA the year before Kareem comes out because they saw what that could mean for them. Obviously, like what it means for him to go from UCLA, this historic program, to little old Milwaukee with 1 year under its belt and not that good. There's just so many fascinating angles that I knew of going into, but like it, by the end of it, I was kind of like, like, how do I just make sense of it all and distill it in a way that like tells his story?
Um, he is one of the more fascinating pieces, goes without saying, in the history of this franchise. I do want to delve a little bit deeper into that, and then some of the other fortune that came the Bucks' way right around that time that everything seemed to really fall in place with this group. So we'll get into that conversation coming up after this. Caffeine just got a flavor upgrade with 5-hour energy shots, delivering tasty caffeine in 17 bold flavors. Each 2-ounce shot packs the caffeine of a premium 12-ounce cup of coffee, plus B vitamins and nutrients with zero sugar and zero crashes. What I love most about 5-hour energy is their portability. You get big taste in a tiny shot. You can take it with you anywhere and get that boost when you need it. I've told you before, I keep a handful of them on me at all times throughout the course of basketball season. So I always have that extra boost of energy, especially for those late night Bucks games. I always tend to reach for the grape flavor. Enough with the boring, flavorless caffeine. It is time to give your caffeine a flavor upgrade with 5-hour energy shots. Get the favorites you love or be bold and try something new in store and online at 5hourenergy.com or Amazon today. That's the number 5hourenergy.com. So I think Kareem is one of the more difficult conversations to have and parse through that. Like you mentioned, I think a lot of his history outside of here is lost on people that, you associate him with the dominance at UCLA and how historic that program was. How highly touted and heralded he was coming out of New York City as a preps player. And then the Lakers, where he capped off his career with, a dominant run next to James Worthy and Magic and the Showtime teams. And, for hardcore basketball fans and certainly Bucks fans and Wisconsinites, let's not forget the championship he brought to Milwaukee and statistically just how dominant he was in those years too. Like, it is remarkable when you go back and look at his numbers. And I think what makes it even more challenging is we didn't have the statistical access that we do now, obviously. Like the play-by-play era, some stats weren't even recorded in Kareem's time. So to see just how jarring his dominance was without that tells you the story of how impactful he was. But I think the challenge and what makes it difficult for a lot, especially of a certain age, 50 and older Bucks fans, is, I was talking about this with somebody back in the spring before the Pacers series when they asked me who would be the Mount Rushmore of most beloved Bucks players. They started with Kareem. And these were people in Indiana. So they said, well, Kareem would be number one, right? And you had to tell him, like, you know, I think it's gotten better. I think the relationship has been, I don't know if repaired is the right word, but it's not where it was. It was very cold for a while. It's not that anymore, but I think maybe less than 10% of Bucks fans you surveyed and told me who are the most beloved players. Give me 4. I don't know if Kareem makes more than 10% of the lists.
I don't think you're wrong. I don't think you're wrong, because I think too, like, I think part of that now is that Giannis is here.
Mhm.
Like, it kind of helps soften the blow of, I was going to mention when we were kind of reminiscing on, COVID times, is like in the middle of the bubble and just kind of where do they go, and the constant speculation of like, is he going to sign? Is he going to stay? Him signing that Supermax extension, I think I wrote about it at the time. I was like, he did what Kareem didn't do. And so it
Yeah.
was just always viewed as, again, symbolically and everything like that. So that's where I think Giannis himself, like, in his, it's certainly been tested since, but like, he's committed to stay in Milwaukee, whether people understand that or not. Whereas Kareem, it's like, you can't, even I would, as much as it is a testament to his time in Milwaukee and just kind of his testament to what he means to this franchise and the fact that it's still going on, you hit on the head of like, it's never been, there's always been a healthy distance there. And whether that was there when he was playing there, and certainly after he left, like, appreciation has come in, but it hasn't necessarily made him like not that this is a barometer, but like the Wisconsin Athletic Hall of Fame doesn't have Kareem in it.
Yeah.
And it's not like this beacon of like, we should have everybody, but it is that kind
Well,
of,
we can't just let everybody in.
Yeah, but it's just like that kind of is like, it's like it just shows you, or even like, again, like, I know he didn't play that long in Milwaukee, but there's not like, the only thing that we know of his time in Milwaukee is that he has a jersey hanging in Pfizer, and they have like a bobblehead statue going up the escalator.
And he's been around more.
Yes.
I think he has. I think the challenge is honestly Kareem's personality, in that, which I'm sure you went through a lot of that in your research and in writing of this, but just as a very, very young Bucks fan, and just first starting to learn the history of the league and learning that Kareem Abdul-Jabbar played for the Bucks, and he had a different name then, and like learning all of that stuff, and asking like uncles of mine and people that were older that experienced that, about like, wow, Kareem played for the Bucks. What was that like? You hear a lot of bad things said of like, he was a jerk. He didn't care about this. He chose to leave, yada, yada, yada. And there's a couple of guys, one specifically and in particular, which I think you can probably read through the lines and figure out who it is, that I've gotten to know quite a bit, that was teammates with Kareem. And I just remember talking with him a lot about Kareem and Oscar and what was your experience like. And just the message of like, well, look, I think it was easy to kind of paint Kareem as the bad guy and the victim, in that he's the guy that turned his back on Milwaukee and asked for the trade and chose to leave and wanted, the bigger city and the bright lights and all that. But like, we didn't experience what Kareem experienced. It was different for me. My experience throughout the city, my day-to-day life and interaction with people, I'm not saying every single person, but I had different experiences than he did. He also grew up in New York City, played college in Los Angeles, then ends up in Milwaukee at a much different time socially in the 60s and early 70s. That it was a lot. And I don't ever think it was Kareem was a bad guy, but I guess to kind of like paraphrase what I'd always been told, is just like, he was his own guy and he was a quiet guy and he was a different guy. And in that way, there were a lot of similarities to Giannis. He is more affable and outgoing, but Giannis is going to keep to himself. And that was a lot of Kareem. He was an introspective guy, and some of his beliefs and viewpoints were things that are very common now, but it wasn't in the 60s and 70s. And I think all of that is what made it easy to make this narrative that Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was the bad guy.
Yes. I totally agree. And I think part of it too is like really like, I did not anticipate kind of writing like a sociological expose of Milwaukee, but that is so baked into everything. Like there are details that like I would get a newspaper clipping and Kareem, because he was meant so much to the NBA and to the Bucks at that time, the things that he desperately did not want to have publicized, whether it was like his marriage or where he was living. Like it's crazy. Like there's a story of like, oh, the apartment that he lived in when he moved to Milwaukee, they had to obviously change the threshold of the doorway. And it's like it's those details that like a guy who's immensely private wasn't, we didn't even know of the religious conversion that he would have a couple years into the league. So there's just a lot of things going on and like a lot of pressure things. Like this is at a time when the league is not, they're flying private jets now. They were flying commercial. So he's this magnet of attention in so many different ways. And I think that gets lost as the years go on of like, he wanted to speak on his own terms and he could never really do it unless if you met him that way. And a lot of the time, I mean, I think it's really interesting of reading how, especially Milwaukee newspapers, like sports columnists, how they kind of interpreted Kareem because he is a civil rights icon as that's happening. And so that's baked into how he's covered. It's inevitable that there's some kind of, I guess differences, to say the least, of how the people covering him are compared to how he views himself to them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, and just his demeanor and his introspection, and he was a thoughtful guy and civil rights leader. I think it was, and it still can be, but there's other outlets for it now. But then, especially, I think it is viewed as arrogance, and that was the biggest problem that he ran into.
Absolutely. And it's at a time when he's viewed as like he's going to change the face of basketball. The Nets and the ABA, they pin their hopes on him coming there too. Like, so there's just so much going on. And you think about it, it's like this guy, like this is at prime kind of, we think of how we grew up and like the ages that we change radically. He's at that stage and he's viewed as this kind of in the moment, like guy that's going to change the face of basketball. And he very much was like, I just want to play it. That's it. That's all I want to do. And it's everything meant so much. I mean, even to the Bucks, because you just think of we think of like what Giannis means to the Bucks. Like there are actual, financial figures that can be found, whether it's, I know there's a lot of, if it's like a front office sports or is a Sportico or whatever. At the time, there wasn't like that, but they were talking about it in that sense of like season ticket sales or like the fact that ABC, the national TV provider at the time, they moved up their game of the week to film Kareem's debut. So it's like, that's like the few snapshots of like what Kareem meant to the NBA, much less the Bucks. But it's like, I can, I'm 33 and I feel like I'm starting to figure things out and how the world is. I can only imagine what a 22-year-old guy that's already had a lot put on him, like can already feel at that time of like, things are just changing rapidly. And how do you kind of figure it out?
Well, and, you get Kareem, who, surprise, surprise, was an absolute stud upon arriving and lived up to the hype, like we've seen from LeBron, and what I think everybody hopes we see from a guy like Victor Wembanyama. Like Kareem was that guy with the attention that he got with his dominance at the collegiate level, And then he carried it over immediately to the NBA level, where we mentioned the Bucks are an expansion franchise. Kareem is a rookie. The following year they reached basically the conference finals in a different playoff format. And then it's the year after that they win the NBA championship. And the big tweak from the 69-70 season to the following season is the addition of another one of those guys, where again, like you look back and like, wow, the Bucks had these two guys that I read about and hear about all the time in the history of this league, and Kareem and Oscar Robertson on the same team.
It's kind of crazy, especially like if there's anything that you could say is different of the two and how time, I guess, was, or how they were viewed in the time of coming to Milwaukee and playing for the Bucks and everything, is that, Oscar, through various like obstacles, chose to come to Milwaukee. He viewed Kareem as his meal ticket to try to win a championship.
Yeah.
And so that was obviously a super validation for the franchise itself. But for him to go from Cincinnati, a team that eventually moved a couple years after he left, which, it kind of, again, another thing that dawned on me, like writing it, is like, you see how that happened with the Royals, and they're kind of like this vagabond team that has been there at the beginning of the NBA, but they hop around. It's like Kareem left eventually, and that could have happened to the Bucks. So like this team could have moved. This team could, like, it could be like these kind of vagabond teams like the Kings or the Hawks now. But I digress. Oscar coming to Milwaukee and that synergy of just like making a big move and it paying off like as big as it did, winning 66 games, sweeping the Bullets. I think it was the second sweep in NBA history to that point in a finals series. And now it's, I think this is another obstacle that you have to like view. I know Zach Lowe talked about like when historic teams, it's like, well, pre-merger it doesn't count. It's like, you could label all these like asterisks, but like it's part of the story of the NBA. It's part of these teams. Like these teams only face the teams that they could do at the time, and if they mowed through the league, even with 3 expansion teams or with a Bullets team that shocked the Knicks, that everybody thought, including the Bucks, that they were going to play in that year's finals.
Yeah.
It's like they still had to play the team that's in front of them, and on their way to the prize, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean, there was certainly what a butting of heads, to put it mildly, between Oscar and Bob Cousy that also led to the exits and trade to Milwaukee. But it worked out perfectly for the Bucks, and you get the final 3 years of Oscar. That's the other thing too, is look, if you're listening to the show, I'm assuming you're pretty well versed with the Bucks, but the fact that the Bucks also played for the championship in 1974, that just kind of gets lost to history.
Yes, it and like, I mean, they had 3 60-win seasons between the championship year, like their title defense year, and then 72-73. They win 59. And when they lost to the Celtics in Game 7 of 73-74. But it's just like that compact time. Like it really is like this rocket ship that just goes super into space, and then it's crazy how precipitous it falls, because right after they lose to the Celtics, like Oscar retires.
Yeah.
Kareem puts in his trade request, not that everybody knew at the time. Something that, like, I can, knock on wood, we never experience this again. Not to be morbid, but it's just like the fact that was something that was a secret until it wasn't later in the season is just kind of remarkable. Obviously, it speaks to like how the NBA is now compared to then. But when you gather all that time of like 68 to 75, basically when they're trying to get Kareem to when Kareem's here, it is just like they live so many different forms of this team that is just remarkable. Even if, we can lament that they only won one championship, it's like still really hard, even when you have one of the greatest players or two of the greatest players to ever play the NBA. It's just like a lot of things happen. A lot of things happen to inform that.
Yeah, I mean, in those 6 years, it like you cannot understate the impact that he had. And it for a franchise that needed it too, that was an expansion franchise and needed to establish a fan base and kind of find their footing in the league. Kareem is an all-star each of those 6 years. He wins 3 MVPs. He leads the Bucks to 1 championship, another finals appearance. Had what, 4 seasons where he averaged 30 or more points, and he basically played every game too. It was just that final season where he missed what you would call in comparison any significant time. That to get that basically from the onset, it's your second year in the league that Kareem arrives and he's already a plug and play all-star.
It's remarkable. It's insane. Like, again, he's one of it's I think for his sake and how we view it, it's like he is bigger than he's associated with the Lakers, but he is bigger than just the NBA. He's one of the greatest basketball players. It's why when LeBron passed him in the all-time scoring list, it's like they are more alike than they are different. Of like this player that you're talking about from high school, and the fact that they had such a enormous amount of hype, pressure, attention from an early age, and that pays off. And it's not like we're just still, I mean, they're still human beings at the end of the day, but like from what they do, the fact that LeBron James is still playing is remarkable. But like even Kareem was played until like, I know it kind of faded in the last few years. It wasn't the same as it was in 1969, 70.
Well, I mean, they're the same age now, right? Where Kareem retired and where LeBron currently is.
Yes, I think so. Yeah. So it's just like, it's just this endless source of kind of going back in time and just looking back at this person's career, this person's work, and you're just kind of in awe. But you also like part of writing this book is that I see him as a human being more than I do this mythic figure. And I think really like again, going back to why he was such a fascinating figure to begin with is like to learn more about what he was going through off the court and that he eventually shared later that made him more kind of that distance shrunk. And I think that to me is like, if anything that anybody could take away from this, like you start to understand why someone might want to leave their current surroundings at that time, much less, it has to do with Milwaukee.
I mean, I don't think this is blasphemous to say, but Giannis is the greatest Buck of all time, and Kareem is the greatest individual player that ever played for the Bucks.
I totally agree with you. I think at this point, it's just like the resume or like the legacy of Giannis is so. It's fitting that they're both, the numbers are right next to each other because it's going to be that kind of like, we view the NBA and the teams of like legends is so player centric and how success is always centered around the people that come into the organization, whether it's mostly on the court, but there are obviously head coaches and general managers and front office people that are owners that help make it happen. But with the Bucks, it's like those two players are going to be intertwined. I think that's where, as Giannis gets deeper into his career, it's so interesting to kind of see how he is taking that on himself to kind of be, part of the history making himself.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. One of the other very, very interesting figures is Larry Costello, who I don't know if we really know a whole lot about him on the surface level. I mean, you obviously know former player, and it was he played all just about up until he took over as the Bucks coach. That it was an injury that ended his playing career, and then was he coaching high school before the Bucks hired him?
So this is where it gets really muddled, but he was coaching for a high school team or slated. Now I'm mixing it up. I think he was slated to coach a high school team because he tore his Achilles in his last year.
Yeah.
You mentioned it. He was originally going to play for the Bucks because they took him in the expansion
In the
draft.
draft. Yeah.
And so it was like, oh, they're gonna have a player coach. You know, I mean, he's this kind. Now he's a Hall of Famer, but he was viewed very highly regarded at the time. And yeah, you're right. Like he's not someone, like we don't think of it at the time. Kareem, Oscar, Bob Dandridge, Johnny Mack, obviously,
Yeah.
those people have bigger. Johnny Mack was on. they're more front facing roles, and obviously, I think it's Larry Costello's been past like 25 years now, so it's not the
Yeah.
same. But he is such an interesting figure in that he is kind of like this very old school, very of his time, but helps kind of establish the blueprint of how they want to play. And he obviously, part of the lore too is that he wasn't their first choice. They wanted to go after Al McGuire and take him away from Marquette. This brouhaha kind of unfolds. And Larry Costello is eventually picked as the original coach, and then wins a championship, goes to another finals, and lasts for 9.5 years. It's funny that one of the things that it's in his resignation video, which you can actually find online. It's the WTMJ archive.
Oh, wow.
But he says about Don Nelson, he says, he's like, I wish Don can only last as long as I did here. And of course, Don Nelson lasted longer than he did, which is crazy. Part of a interesting wrinkle.
Yeah, I mean, the career that he had, and obviously everybody, it's easy to point to just Kareem and say like, well, you had this guy, but the volume of 60-win seasons that he had right out of the gate. You mentioned too Don Nelson and the staff that he built, I think is the bigger takeaway from a lot of people around the league, and how much he empowered that staff back then too, which like now has become commonplace. And he was the first one that really leaned into like building a bench of assistant coaches, which was unheard of then.
Yeah, I mean, future NBA coaches were Tom Nasalki, Hubie Brown, Don Nelson, Jack McKinney, I believe. Yes, Jack McKinney. And this is at a time where it's just one or two coaches, including the head coach.
Yeah.
These guys are doing scouting trips. Like he's going to Chicago to see not just the Bulls, but who they're playing that night. So it's like now it's just an army of assistant coaches for Doc Rivers and company. But it is just like these guys are, when they say they're basketball lifers, it's like that is what they're doing. If they're not in practice, if it's not a game, it's going to Chicago or to another city to see like who the Bucks are going to eventually see a couple of weeks from now. So it's again another kind of like fun. I can only imagine how exhausting that would be, but like if you're in it, you're in it at that time. The money wasn't nearly the same as it is now, so it's like for love of the game was Larry Costello's motto for sure.
I mean, I've heard my share of stories because I guess this will give away the secret of source from earlier, but in getting to know John McLaughlin, when he was still doing TV, when I started doing radio for the team, and for whatever reason, John kind of took me under his wing. And so whenever Hubie Brown would be in town calling a game, those two would always, be off back in the Bradley Center. You'd find him like under a stairwell, just talking and reminiscing over things. And I'd try to eavesdrop as much as I could. And then finally, one time, John had spotted me and just said, like, just come over here and sit down and you can listen. And if you want to ask something, go ahead. And just like hearing them share stories about those practices and how late they would be up with archaic film study that you had and like reading through coaching manuals and their travel, like all of that group, whenever they're together, and it's like it for any team, but I think especially then when you think about how different the conditions were then versus the luxury that you have now, like hearing those stories and hearing how much that really galvanized and bonded anybody that was a part of that staff or that team as a group.
It's really remarkable. I true like I'm like going through like there'll be times where I'm just like, okay, how does this fit? Like things that obviously you cut from like the main central story, but it's like you hear about or read about like this flight that goes in later, like they have to get off the plane because there's a fire with the plane, or the hotel room they have to evacuate because someone pulled a fire alarm. It's like it really is just like probably the equivalent of like an 8th grade traveling baseball team. Like that's like the flying conditions. So yeah, I mean, like of course they're gonna bond with guys in that way of like we're in it together, whether whether we like it
I
or
remember
not, you know?
one John telling a story about because like back then everybody was wearing Chucks pretty much,
Yes.
Converse, and somebody had a blowout on the bottom of their shoe, so you had to try to find like, does anybody else wear the same size? Who's close enough? And then trade shoes going into and out of the game of like, all right, I need your shoes. Like that was just commonplace.
It's like Giannis and Thanasis, you know, way back when. It's not that it's not that far removed from when that was happy for an NBA team.
Yeah. Was there anything in doing all the research that you felt like most surprising thing you learned, or um I don't know, like you had a pretty good understanding of the history and it's just kind of learning more of the details, or is there anything where you were like, wow?
Ooh, uh, that's a. I feel like my answer changes every day, but I do think a lot of it's centered around Kareem. Actually, something that we haven't touched on as much, but the story of how the Bucks came to being, and a lot of the first 25, 30 pages is centered around Milwaukee as like a sports town.
Yeah.
It the Braves leave. It's really viewed as this unforgivable sin that Major League Baseball leaves Milwaukee, and it's feeds into kind of the inferiority complex that I think still exists even to this day. Um, but it is so intertwined to how the Bucks are viewed when they come into the league, and the things that Martin Fishman and Wes Pavlon, who is quite a character in his own right,
Mm,
um, it that really kind of, again, like we view the numbers, we view the records, we view the title, like those things, like we can reference that on Basketball Reference, but reading these, like how the reputation of Milwaukee is viewed socially, or even through like big city sports, kind of pride level of reputation. And it's like when the Bucks, or when it was announced that the Milwaukee was getting an NBA team again. They Milwaukee Mayor Henry Meyer mentions how it's in relation to like the black eye that Major League Baseball gave Milwaukee. And when I read that, I'm just like, these people hated that the Braves left
yeah.
so bad, so bad. And it's like like it all came to me of like you could tell the story of the Brewers and baseball and have it be contained to that. You could tell the story of the Packers in Green Bay and have it be contained to that. You can't tell the story of the Bucks without talking about the Packers because of Vince Lombardi and Martin Fishman's efforts to get a football team, and without baseball because there was nothing. And that was so how Milwaukee and Wisconsin, because it was bigger than just Milwaukee itself, but how people viewed the Braves leaving and things just kind of going quiet. And then the time between that and then when the Bucks come into the NBA of like what's going on in Milwaukee, and the kind of the race riots, the long hot summer and all that stuff, that's all in going on as this is going
Yeah.
on too. So it things that I just didn't anticipate really kind of exploring in going into this book, that I was just constantly fascinated in how these two things exist and kind of intertwined at times, that I think from a modern day lens we could view, even going back to the title year in 21 of like how Milwaukee is viewed, and just how I don't know how all these things kind of talk to each other but are separate in the same way.
Well, it was like the groundwork was laid almost immediately, right? From the Braves leaving to the Bucks, because that was 65. Was that the last year the Braves were in
Last year was
Milwaukee?
65, and they even, I mean, there was a lot of legal hassles that they were trying to get them to play in
Yeah.
66. But yeah, it basically, when the Braves leave, Marvin Fishman and Herb Kohl get in kind of trying to fill the void, so to speak.
Yeah. And, with Marvin Fishman too as the president of the team, then another name we didn't mention, Wayne Embry and his impact
Yeah.
on building the team. And he was the first when they hired him, he was the first African American GM in the league, right?
Yes, yes, he was. And it was just like it was late in the 71-72 year. Um, and at that time, I mean, Wade Embry is kind of, again, his book that he wrote, his autobiography that came out in like 2003, 2004. It's one of the best basketball books I've read because it really just lays out everything of like basketball and society speaking to each other. But he was already so big of a figure at that time because he comes to the Bucks through the expansion draft, was the last guy to sign his
Yeah.
contract because he was originally going to retire, then is made captain and retires, and they kind of do this big send off and always kind of kept the door open for him to be like a figure within the organization. Plays a big role in Oscar Robertson picking Milwaukee as his next destination. And then he comes back into the fold through that, and West Pavilion picks him as the GM to take over for Ray Patterson. And it's, of that time, it's like, again, he's a pioneer in so many different ways. And you read how it's viewed in the time of like, again, it's 1972. It's things are changing, sports are changing, and it's viewed as him being black and becoming the first general manager, opening the door for it's not just momentous for that occasion, but it's also the fact that he's a player, and it's like this is what you are able to do after you retire. Like it's very big because he obviously kind of helps him steward the franchise in the years moving forward, but then is a pioneer in how other players can eventually take on that role that he earned.
Yeah, I mean, he had the unfortunate task of having to trade Kareem and execute his trade request, but brought back the package that he did, which propelled the Bucks in that decade of success that we talked about with Brian Winters and Junior Bridgman, obviously the two big names in there. And I mean, he was um, a league figure. He was a front office executive all the way until the early 2000s, I want to say, when he bounced around I remember him with the Cavs as the GM. I think he was at the Raptors in the early 2000s. So
He might be even like I feel like on Wikipedia it still says he's like a consultant. I don't know how now, Messiah leaving. I don't know how like much of a consultant he is anymore for them. And plus he's an 88-year-old man, if
yeah.
memory serves. But and
Well, I mean,
that's
you could say if you look at the history of some of the moves the Raptors have made, it would make sense for an 88-year-old man in recent
that
years.
is true. That is true. But going back to this, I meant to talk about this earlier, but a lot of these guys are still alive. And
Yeah,
it's crazy. Like you're talking about Johnny Mack and
yeah,
Kareem, Oscar, guys
yeah,
go on down the line. It's like Bobby Dandridge, Greg Smith. He's like this viewed as this important starting figure
yeah.
in the championship year. And I think compare that to like, last couple of years, we've unfortunately lost like Bob Lanier and Junior Bridgman, Dave Myers, you mentioned too. He passed about over a decade ago. It's like, these guys tell these stories and then it feels like it just goes in the ether. And I don't know if that's just because of how the NBA is or because it's the Bucks and it's not the Celtics, it's not the Knicks, it's not the Lakers.
Yeah. I mean, I
But
think it's a combo.
yeah, and it's to me, it's like I don't know why it's so important to me to tell the history of the NBA or through the lens of the Bucks, but because I'm so aware of like it's not always we're not that source is eventually going to run out. We don't want that to, but you know what I mean?
I think it's a combo of those things that it's not a glamorous market. Um, that was an era where things weren't documented quite as
Yes.
much. We already mentioned a lot of the archival footage. It's tough to come across for a lot of this stuff. And they have certainly done a better job of it. It coincided with the ownership change, which, like, Herb Kohl is a very important piece. And you talk about people we no longer have with us, remains
Yes.
in a very important figure in this franchise. I mean, first and foremost, I don't think the Bucks are in Milwaukee if it's not for two people, Herb Kohl and Giannis. They have relocated since. If it is not for the wishes of Herb Kohl and the demand of when he sold the team, that no, it stays here. And if it's not for Giannis arriving on the scene and becoming what he is, the arena's not built, the interest isn't there, and they're gone. But they've done a better job of recognizing and shining a light on their history right around that time for about 10 plus years now, I would say. I would still like to see more. Like, I'd like to see something in the arena even that just calls attention to the history of this team and that championship team, how they were built. The team that, gets mentioned the most, or the era that gets mentioned the most for a while, was a group that didn't win a championship. And the team in the 80s, like, giving more attention to them as well. Just having a place for your history like the Brewers do. And I know it's different because it's summertime and you can walk and see it outside of the stadium, but like the Brewers do at their stadium, like the Packers have with their own Hall of Fame, like I would like to see a shred of that with this organization.
I would agree. I know for a fact, and I know you would know. I think the biggest difference is that you could see that at AmFam. You could see that at Lambeau. I mean, certainly outside of Lambeau too, just Green Bay itself.
Yeah.
I think you can only see that if you are a certain part of like a season ticket holder
Yep.
at the arena,
Yep.
which I understand, but it's also like, whatever. That's a separate discussion. But it is just like you mentioned, it's like there's so much history. And the fact that retired numbers are such a big deal, like when Gary Harris got the number 11, and it's like, what does that mean for Brooks? And selfishly, or to be honest, I know I felt that too. It's like, that's Brooks' number. What are you doing? Like, it's like but that's all. Like, that is probably the only discussion that we can really have of like what it means to really honor these players and these people. And I think, not to be stooge my or stump my book, but it's like when you learn about that from reading stuff, or like the fact that we have this era of Bucks basketball, we saw it come from where it came from, where they're a 15-win team when Giannis and Chris are rookies, to winning the championship. And then we see that's a story there. That's a story that we can glom onto, and why we're going to keep watching them, and why we still hold the hope that they can win another one. And I think that to me is like, we look at the retired numbers, we look at the banners like in the arena, but it's like these people live lives, and like what they mean to a city or to a franchise. Like it is just, I don't know if, again, I don't know if that's a Bucks thing or if an NBA thing, but like there's just a lot of things just kind of fall through the cracks as time goes on, that you know it's not fun to it's a thankless job in a lot of ways to like to look at it from a history perspective, but it's still stuff that like I think you can't, or I hope people don't want to forget, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, certainly had some feelings when I saw Gary Harris's number assigned, but I mean, we've had Brooks' number given out, Drew's number's been given out, Pat
Yeah,
Connaughton's number is gone now.
Yeah.
Jason Caffey's number was given up too. So like it's just time is a flat circle here. We'll touch on this as we start to wrap here, as I've kept you way too long here. What was the era that got you in? Like, what's the first team you really remember for the Bucks?
I'm probably gonna be very unoriginal. It's definitely the light it up Big Three era.
Yeah.
01 run. Like I was very conscious of the NBA, certainly Michael Jordan,
Yeah.
certainly the Bulls, but seeing the Bucks, it's on NBC. It's on broadcast television. And that's another sneaky role, not to distract me from my answer, but like I think part of the problem with this is that the NBA kind of follows where the money's leading with television and how games are going to get broadcast. And when we'll experience this firsthand this year. When you go from a TNT or when you go from an ABC to a CBS to an NBC to like follow that through, it's like things are going to get lost that way because you're just naturally
Well, I mean,
following
do you have
too.
Twitter? Because it's a highlight league. So
Yeah. Oh man. What a yeah, that itself is kind of like that's maybe why the NBA has a history problem in a lot of ways. But yeah, the team and era was definitely the big three of Ray Allen, Sam Cassell, and Glenn Robinson.
who
And
was
plus,
your
I was going
who
to
was your
answer
first favorite?
Darvin Ham for sure.
Okay.
Because it's like if you think about it, Vince Carter, the dunk contest,
Mhm.
it's so that certainly made me an even bigger NBA fan. So when I see Darvin Ham do these like rip roaring dunks, and
Well,
he's
the guy that just shattered the backboard at Texas Tech too in the tournament.
exactly,
So like, yeah.
exactly. So it's like that guy. I just thought he was like Superman. I thought he was like this guy is the best player in the league, and I don't want anybody else to tell me otherwise. But yeah, I was just like enamored by Darvin Ham. So that was a treat. Like I remember, I think it was even the first Bucks game I went to. He had a big dunk. I was like, you could do that? Like I didn't know that was possible. It was crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I would assume that's the team for a lot of people. That was the one that like really got me to like I was already in because basketball's always been my favorite sport. So I'm a little older than you, so I suffered through the 80s or the 90s, early 90s and late 80s Bucks teams at the Bradley Center and guys, like Blue Edwards and like Lee Mayberry and Todd Day, those teams where you just knew like I'm going to see the team that we're playing. Like, I hope
Yeah.
we win, but I'm going there to see this guy, and I want to see this Sean Kemp guy. So yeah, when the big three developed and came, and I still remember the Sam Cassell trade, thinking like, oh wow, like I remember I've seen a lot of this guy, and I remember this guy hitting some big shots with the Rockets. Like, we have Sam Cassell now, and that was when it was, hey, maybe we'll actually be good.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, it is because I think was that Karl's first year, the Cassell trade?
I believe so, man. Now you're putting me on. Let's double check. I do believe it was George Karl's first year.
Because that might have also
Um,
been like the lockout
because that
year.
was the shortened season where they
Yeah.
were the 7th seed, I think. Because they
Yes.
just like this, they played the Pacers in the first round 2 years in a row. I remember to this day everything about the second because the first year they played Indiana, they were swept and back in the
Yeah.
best of 5 format. They were swept, but it was a competitive sweep. If such a thing exists. The second year was when they were, I think, the 8th seed, and they took them the distance to
5,
5.
yeah.
And I remember just about everything about that series. I can still picture Travis Best hitting that corner 3 where I thought like the Bucks are going to do it and they're going to beat the Pacers and move on to, I can't even remember who they would have played in the second round, but it still haunts me seeing Travis Best hit that shot.
Oh yeah. And it's crazy. Like, I mean, again, I was a very small child at that time, but to think that they went through, I think it was like 12 years of not winning a playoff series, and then adding another streak of going 18 from
18.
that oh
Yeah.
01 year to eventually the Pistons series in 19. It's like,
And then finally snapping it at 3.
yeah, Let's hope. No, I didn't. No. But yeah, and the symmetry of the Pacers going back to back is just crazy too. But yeah, everything about that era was just like it was. I don't know. It is another kind of fascinating era that just like went like a rocket ship and then just like declined so fast.
Um, yeah, I mean, I think there are certainly additional versions of the book to get into. Is I know this one is the building of them and very heavy on everything that we've touched on, but everything that followed too, like the era of the 80s and how that group was built and what Don Nelson did, the impact of the guys that we mentioned that came over in the Kareem trade, and then the basically Siberia version of the Bucks, where as soon as that ended, it got pretty bleak. And I mean, the fact that, part of it too, George Karl and just the hype around it. It wasn't just the big three, it was the hiring of George Karl, where it was like, whoa. Because I think was it Chris Ford that preceded him, where you just went through those types of
Yes,
coaches, and then you hire George Karl, and like the guy that just coached the Sonics to the finals, like here they come. And even that, it was everything you envisioned, but it burned out pretty quickly.
very much so. Yeah, there's so much. I mean, trust me, I have a lot of stuff that I'm sitting on and slowly working out my way on like future stuff because as you mentioned, like post Kareem Bucks are very fascinating. Marcus Johnson is incredibly
Yeah.
fascinating for a lot
Yeah.
of reasons. Um, but yeah, it's a story that you can keep telling because there's so many. It's just layers of on layers of things that whether it's time or the fact that the Bucks were kind of a forgotten franchise for a very long time as the NBA was ascending in its view around the world. It is just like now that we're kind of hopefully past that. It is it makes it more enjoyable to know that there is this history and hopefully things can get a little bit better on the court coming into this year that you can see how the story gets added to it, I guess.
And the fact that they finally caught a break with the drafting of Giannis, but not only that, just the fact that um, it was supposed to be Jabari. Giannis was supposed to be the Robin to Jabari Parker, and when you see the injuries that pile up and how that career went, you just here we go again. And then Giannis just continues to grow and becomes what he is. So a lot of very, very interesting stories to be told throughout the near 60-year history of this franchise now. But a lot of detail that we plowed over here on that first basically decade of the Bucks. I mentioned it too. Easiest place to find the book is Amazon, and it's Building the Bucks is the name of the book. I know you just did a signing and a Q&A as well, and some local bookstores you can find it at throughout Milwaukee and Wisconsin. But you can get it on Amazon. Building the Bucks, the name of the book. Jordan, I'm sure we'll catch up again throughout the course of the season, and we'll see what else comes from this. If there's a part 2 to this.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me on.
That'll do it for today's show. Back again tomorrow, and we're actually going to take a look at one of those teams that figures to finish around the Bucks in the standings. For Jordan, I'm Justin. We'll talk with you guys once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.